I guess I have to start with a good old g'day, mate. Uh, G'day, friends. I am from Australia, so I hope that my accent is understandable. I am so excited to be here today. As Jennifer mentioned, we met virtually about 6 or 7 years ago, and I have been watching her trailblaze in America, and I like to think I've been doing similar things in Australia. So, I'm going to be talking today about a concept called the invisible infrastructure and how social capital builds disaster resilience. I wore my favorite jacket. I am from Melbourne, so the little star here. Can I ask, have any of you or many of you been to Australia? Oh, cool. Okay, everyone else, we have to talk later because you have to come and visit. We're about the same land size, so the same kind of land size as what you are in mainland America. I think you've got about 340 million people, maybe. We've got 26 million people, so we've got a lot of land and not so many people. I am known for doing disasters differently because disasters are changing and we need to change too. So, my focus is that we need to think different, but most importantly, we need to do different. So, I do a lot of applied research. I use nudge theory, which is literally nudging people along in teeny tiny steps so that they can understand it towards resilience. So, I'm going to talk you through a couple or three disaster events or situations in Australia. You might have seen some of these images go around the world back in 2019, 2020. So, summer for us is over Christmas and New Year. So, we're actually in winter at the moment. It's freezing where I'm from. But in 2019, 2020, literally a few days before Christmas, we had fires start out. All the stars that I've shared with you here are where fires were burning across Australia. So we have hectares, you have acres. We had about 60 million acres. We had 34 direct deaths and we had 450 deaths from smoke inhalation. Now, what is really interesting, I think, and shares, I guess, reflects in these photos, not only did the sky go red, but these people were out in where the sort of lower star is in the green part down the bottom. They literally had fires all around them. They had to go to the ocean, literally to the sea. So they're sitting on jetties. And it's a really big tourist town. It's the high tourist season. So you've got locals, you've got tourists, you've got them all sitting on jetties, literally waiting for the Navy ships to arrive to help them because they were in like the ocean was the only way to get them out. We have beautiful wine regions. So in South Australia here, this is the Adelaide Hills. Highly recommend any grape and wine enthusiasts to come to this area. In Australia, we have compounding disasters at the moment. So a few people have talked about multi-hazards. We use an approach for all hazards because 80% of what you're going to prepare for or how you're going to recover is going to be the same, irrespective of the type of disaster or disruption. So in the Adelaide Hills in beautiful South Australia, they have, over the past couple of years, they've had long-term drought, then they had a flood, and then they had a bushfire, literally all within weeks. So you imagine as a community, you're dealt with drought over the past number of years. You've then been impacted by a flood and a bushfire at the same time. How do you recover? How can you recover after those compounding events when your community is already so stretched? So not fires, and I think we call wildfires bushfires. So not directly fire related, but this is an area in New South Wales where that big star is, which was a major flooding event that occurred just a couple of years ago. It was actually the second flooding event in a couple of years for this community. So see the picture here of McDonald's, good old, we have McDonald's in Australia as well. You can see the picture of the sign with the palm tree at the back of the sign. That's the sign with the palm tree at the back of the sign. So that's a two and a half story building. The flooding in the main part of town in Lismore went up that high. So 5 confirmed deaths, 6,000 flood impacted residents, and a flood recovery is a bit different to a fire recovery. Many things are the same, but it's a longer process in many ways because the infrastructure and that is still there. But we had the rise of the tinny army. Has anyone heard of a tinny army? So you're going to learn so many things. Oh, my friend Daniel has. You heard it yesterday, that's why, when you were taking me around. So the tinny army is basically all the people from the community who have a tin boat. So they've got a tin boat with a motor. And when the flood's happening and the people are on the roofs of their houses or wherever they might be, you get in the tinnies. It's an army of local people who go out and save people. They are pulling people and animals off their houses. So remember that as one of the Australian little nuggets of gold I've given you. So in the disaster resilience space in Australia, there is a lot of focus on systems, on plans, on technology, and on grey infrastructure. So, our buildings, our bridges, our roads. But the people connections are the invisible infrastructure of disaster resilience. And it's the people that we know, that we trust, and that we coordinate with that are absolutely essential in our preparedness, our response, and recovery. But we don't talk about them, we don't include them because we can't see them until now. So I've been working with and Daniel, please don't put your hand up again. Haven't many of you heard Professor Daniel Aldrich? Do you know him? I think like there was a few before. Yep. Okay, you have. So Professor Daniel Aldrich is actually from Boston, and I met him a number of years ago, and he was impacted by Hurricane Katrina. And the only reason that he's here today is because his neighbor knocked on his door and said, "You need to leave." And he did. So he's spent many years researching the networks and the importance of networks and the people that we know in terms of how we can build resilience, preparedness, and recovery. So I've also been advocating for this new approach that focuses on that invisible infrastructure. And I'm really excited because at the start of the year, the Australian government gave me some money to create a national framework. So next month, you're actually getting a little sneak peek. But next month, Professor Aldrich is coming back to Australia and we're launching a framework, which the Australian government has said that they're going to be endorsing as well, which is huge. A framework on what is social infrastructure and social capital and social infrastructure so that we can embed it into the ecosystem of disaster resilience. So when we have the conversations around being prepared or recovering from disasters, the notion of people networks and people connections will actively be part of that conversation because it's documented and it's endorsed, which is huge. But we're also mapping. So Professor Aldrich has maps of how connected people and communities are. And I'm going to show you that in a minute. We're doing it in 3 pilot communities in Australia. So do most of you know what social capital is? Yep, fantastic. So I'm not going to define, and part of the framework is not to define social capital because, quite frankly, that would be a bit dumb when I've got, like, the global professor of social capital working with me. So for me, it's about descriptors. How do we talk about it? How do we get people to embed it into their conversations? So the current descriptor, and this is not formally launching until next year, so next month, so it might change a little bit. But social capital refers to the connections, the trust and the coordination between people. So that's the language that we want people to talk about. So if you meet people, if you have a meeting with government, if you have a meeting with a community, talk about what social capital is so we can define it, we can describe it, and we can embed it into our conversations. Now, Professor Aldrich's work has 3 types of social ties. And I heard someone before mention the ties, the connections that they have. So the first type are bonding ties. So bonding ties are people that are like you, very similar to you. So probably a best example might be your family, your friends, or your close neighbors. So you've got high levels of trust. You know them well. If they knock on your door and tell you to evacuate, you're going to do it. You sort of have similar norms and behaviors. So you think different, you think the same, you live the same, you've got lots of trusted norms, and you've got close networks. So these are the ones that typically in place-based communities are high. The second type are bridging ties. Now, this is a room full of my new American bridging ties. These are connections with people who are different to you. It might be generational difference. It might be demographic difference. It might be cultural difference. Now, bridging ties are hard because we have to book in time to have coffee and cake or a beer at the pub to meet new people and connect with new people. But when it comes to disaster preparedness, but more importantly, recovery, bridging ties are okay. I thought they were, sorry, coming for me or something. Right. Um, Bridging ties are absolutely essential to community recovery, but bridging ties need to be prepared beforehand. So, as someone mentioned before, there's no point in waiting until a disaster occurs to build connections with people. And the people in this room are absolutely your new network of bridging ties. Bridging ties are harder to make, they're harder to keep, they're more fragile because people change roles, etc., but they're really, really important. Now, the last type of ties is a slightly different, I guess, of level of power, etc. So, linking ties are connections between people, say me as a community member, and those in roles of power or authority or influence. So, people who have connections into the mayor, into emergency responders, into government, various levels of governments, typically can recover better. They can get more money, they can get more help because they know who to connect with. So linking ties also, there are low trust. Like, let's be honest, me as a community person going into a government, different levels of trust. They don't trust me because I'm a community person, and I don't trust them because they're government. So they're harder to make and maintain. But different norms, again, community, business, government, all have different approaches and behaviors. And the networks are very fragile because you might have someone come in who's a different political view, or you might have someone that, you didn't know, etc., etc. And it takes a while to build those connections. But linking ties and bridging ties are really important. They're harder, they take more work, but they're really important to build and maintain. So just imagine if you had a map to have evidence to support the ties. Now, in Australia, if you can't map it or provide the evidence, you don't value it. And if you don't value it, you don't fund it and recognize it and invest in it. So the work that we're doing with Professor Aldrich is to map bonding, bridging, and linking ties. Now, this is not real-time data, but just to share with you what this looks like. So here you'll see in terms of bonding ties. So this map shares with us around the city of Adelaide how strong or weak the bonding ties are in that community. So the light is weak and the dark is strong. So this map tells us that in certain areas, and we're measuring it at what we call in Australia the SA1 block, which is basically a neighbourhood block. So in the SA1 block, we can very clearly see here what are the community groups that have strong connections and what are the groups that don't. So if you overlay that with like a bushfire or a wildfire risk map, you can clearly see who might not get that knock on the door from that next door neighbour to go to leave. Bridging ties, so the connections with people who are different to us. So there's a number of indices that we use to measure this. But again, bridging ties are things like we measure how percentage of people who volunteer, etc. So if people are volunteering, then they've typically got broader bridging ties. Again, if we map the bridging ties, this can tell us the blocks in the communities that don't have the opportunities to connect into wider networks for their help and their preparedness and recovery. Okay, so who's met a new bridging tie today? Awesome. And please come and meet me because I would love to chat with you and hear about all the great work that you're doing. Because while I am very excited to be here presenting today, I'm also soaking in all the information to take back to Australia. Thank you to my bridging tie friend over there. So, linking ties. So, these, remember, is the one between community members and those in roles of power or authority. So, I've presented this to a lot of forums in Australia, and the first responders and council workers in particular, which is sort of the lower county level, are so excited by this one because this shows us the blocks of people who are not connected into roles, people in roles of authority or government. So, if you think about government delivering the messaging to how we tell people to prepare or respond or recover. If you're from a block in those light areas, they're not listening to you. They're not following your response. If you come into their community to say, this is what you need to do, they're not listening to you. There's no trust. So again, if you overlay this type of mapping with flood or bushfire risk mapping, you can then say, as a government department or a local council or an emergency services, We need to go and connect and build broader trust in those community groups as well. Now, social capital is inclusive of everyone. That's why I love it. Everyone needs connections, and there's so many benefits of connections. So in Australia, it's relevant to cities, to metros, to regionals, across all types of groups and organisations, including the ones that you're here from today. But it's not just limited to disasters. So we are using disasters as our entry point to get this national framework. But it's not just about disasters. Knowing social capital measurement can help with social cohesion, with crime prevention, with aging, with health and well-being, with urban and regional planning. There are so many benefits. And in Australia, we are talking to cross-government and multi-government areas around the benefits of social capital, particularly obviously in the disaster space, but also in the social cohesion space. Social infrastructure. So has anyone heard of social infrastructure before? Yep, a few. So social infrastructure are the shared spaces and places that create opportunities for people to connect, build trust, and work together. So they are those places in the communities that are very important to the communities to bring people together. Now, I don't know about you, but a lot of the time in Australia, when they fund what they're going to recover or replace or, the infrastructure in communities, they don't go to the social infrastructure. They don't go to what's important to the community. They fund the bridges, the roads, the critical infrastructure that they may or may not have had in the planning for many years beforehand. But social infrastructure is absolutely essential when it comes to bridging ties. So if you think about it, when you drop your kids off at school, it's the other parents that you don't really know. They live differently to you. There might be different cultures, etc. But making those connections at school with people that you don't know is really critical. So social infrastructure is, I guess, the secondary component of social capital that we're also looking to get onto the map. So in the work with Professor Aldrich, there are 4 categories of social infrastructure. So what my role at the moment has been is to Australianize it. So I had Professor Aldrich in Australia for about 6 weeks, and we went around the whole country to all the different states and territories. And let me tell you, karaoke bars, not big in Australia. We don't connect in a karaoke bar, I can tell you now. So community places, what can you think about? What would community places be here? Libraries, schools, community centres. We'll come to parks in a minute. So community places are typically the places that, like local government or federal government, they're typically free, they're open, they're inclusive. And if you think of like your local library, you've got elderly people going there to connect and have group sessions or have some digital literacy access. You've got mums with little kids going there. You've got kids from school. Lots of people go into the libraries. So they're really, really important places of connection. But are they considered in the rebuild or the preparedness of communities? Not so much. Open spaces. Someone said parks. Yep. So parks, footy ovals in Australia, playgrounds, beaches, all those open spaces and places that are free for people to enjoy. Now, social businesses. What would be the most popular social business in Australia? And this is, very Australian, that communities want saved or kept when a disaster occurs? The pub. Oh man, how'd you get that so easy? 100%. We did research. What do you want kept? What's really important? The pub. In the regional communities in Australia, it's the pub that they go to, that they have dinners at, regular dinners, that they have the fundraisers, that, they have like men's health awareness sessions. The pub is absolutely central. Strangely, at the moment, the Australian government doesn't necessarily fund rebuilding pubs after disasters. But this group in particular is one that I am so passionate about because the social businesses, the small businesses, the hairdressers, the cafes, the pubs, they are the social and economic heartbeat of our communities. And while we talk a lot about saving lives when it comes to disasters and saving lives, absolutely priority number 1. But saving livelihoods and enabling these social businesses to stay in business is a real priority as well. So social businesses has a huge list at the moment. I had to arm wrestle Professor Aldrich a little bit because he was like, we're not including pharmacies. I was like, yep, We are. In Australia, the pharmacist knows everyone and everything about everyone, including all their healthcare needs. They need to be included. A couple of other arm wrestles I didn't win, but that's okay. We won't mention those. Professor Aldrich also does places of worship. So in Australia, we've renamed it to places of culture and faith. So the churches, the synagogues, the Aboriginal cultural heritage sites that they'd like us to include, etc. So these are the 4 categories of social infrastructure that are really relevant to bridging ties. And we are mapping them. So we will also have evidence that supports not just where they are, but the evidence that we'll have is actually a calculation, which I don't have here, but it's going to show the density number for each block. So for each block, we'll have a number that says how equitable and how much social infrastructure is there available to this block of people to support them to connect. That's huge. Because then it also shows that in certain communities in Australia where we have like urban sprawls and they forgot to include a park or anything else there, that will show us that there are programs and projects and initiatives in those blocks that need focus to bring people together, particularly around the bridging ties. So why measure social capital and social infrastructure? I mentioned before that if we don't measure it, we don't value it. And if we don't value it, we don't invest in it. And I've been hearing here today, and no doubt over the next couple of days, that there is a big shortage of funding, a big shortage of funding. And someone told me the other day that when the government is handing out what they're funding, they just want to stamp what's easy for them to do. And the bridges and the roads and that is easy for them to do. But the social infrastructure and the places and the spaces that support people to connect is absolutely fundamental. And so the work that we're doing is about evolving that so that when that Treasury person has his big stamp, he understands what it is that he's going to be funding or she is going to be funding so that they can actually consider this in their funding mechanisms as well. So the benefits of social capital, you can identify strengths and gaps in community connection. Bonding, bridging, linking ties. You can see who's connected and who's not connected. So then you can target support where it's needed most. There have been programs of grant funding in Australia where they've given out funding thinking that they're giving it to a certain group to do a certain thing, and it's not needed, or it's actually done something else. So part of what we'll be looking to bring is to measurement around grant funding, around making sure that when you are granting out money, you are helping the right communities in the right way. And connecting communities is a key part of that. And then tracking improvements in social capital. So the aim is to measure and measure and measure over the years and to deliver the programs to support people to connect and better connect and then see what that traction and how that's working. Because a lot of the work with Professor Daniel Aldrich is that connected communities are more resilient than affluent communities. So you don't necessarily need money to connect. Social infrastructure, the benefits will be to identify the gaps to connection driving places and spaces and to target strategic investment in building social ties. So when the Treasury person is looking at the bridge or the pub, maybe not the pub, maybe the library, they've got an apple to apple kind of decision to make. And then tracking overlays across planning and healthcare services. So I mentioned before, our focus is disasters, but I've got so much interest from the government areas of like domestic violence and foster kids and mental, health, etc. That if you overlay that, the loneliness epidemic that's hitting Australia as well. So if you overlay this data in all sorts of areas, there's so many opportunities from a social capital and social infrastructure perspective. So before, during, and after disaster strikes in Australia, it's all about systems. Yay! We have a process. We forgot to tell the disaster the process, but we have a process. Processes are really important, systems are really important, and plans are really important. Don't get me wrong. The more we can get communities and businesses and governments planned for what's potentially going to happen, the better. However, it's not just about them. Technology matters. Yep, the alerts, they come, they don't come, they're right, they're late, whatever they might be, absolutely important as well. But when the systems don't work and when the technology doesn't quite work, don't forget it's the people connections. It's who you know, it's who you trust, and it's who you cooperate or coordinate with that is going to build resilience. People connections, in my opinion, matter the most, because whether those technology and systems do or don't come through, it's the tinny army, your neighbour, your friend, your network, your connection into government that's going to help you the most. And this person up here, the lady second to the right, her name's Fiona Jago, and she works with me now delivering workshops. And she was on Kangaroo Island, which is a beautiful little island off South Australia, and she was the caravan park owner of the western part of the island in the national park area. And when the bushfires occurred over Kangaroo Island, it basically took out half the island. And the emergency services did not believe that she had 300 people there with caravans, about half tourists, didn't speak much English, were there for a holiday, didn't want to leave because they'd spent the money on booking the caravan site. So she herself was responsible for evacuating and liaising with the government, etc., to get these people out. So we've heard a lot today about the community responders and the first responders being community people. This program and having this measurement enables us to understand that if Fiona and her caravan park is the only place of connection in that part of a community, we need to know her and we need to invest in her. So if I could leave you with a little call to action. Sorry, I remember at the start I said think differently and do differently. So if I could ask all my new bridging ties in the room, understand and measure social capital and social infrastructure. Please don't let this be another talk where you've heard some strange Aussie kind of tell you a few things. Understand what it is, connect it into what you do, and make sure you talk about it and talk about it with others in this room and out of this room. And fund programs that build social capital. So we're talking about some of the philanthropic funders just before. Please don't just go to physical infrastructure. Please think in your funding about those places that foster connections and things that foster connections. So your block parties, your barbecues, whatever that might be. And invest in community places and spaces that are community connectors. So bring the community into your conversations in preparedness, but also in recovery. What do you want rebuilt? This is a new thing that's happening in Australia when communities have been impacted by disasters. It's not the government deciding what they're going to rebuild. What do you want rebuilt? What is the most important to get this community connected during the recovery? And recognize that resilience is relational. It's not just operational. So much in this space is about the operations and the trucks and the systems, but it's relational. It's who you know, who you trust, and how you can work together. So it's time, and I hope you take a picture of this and share it within all your networks. It's time to recognise people connections as essential infrastructure in disaster resilience, and very much a big part of what I'm trying to do in Australia, and very happy to talk with anyone who's interested in here, is to make this invisible visible. We need to make it visible so it's a really active part of the ecosystem and conversations. So my new room of bridging ties, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I've got some flyers and that there. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and learn from you as well.